I stood on that porch with snow falling on my gray hair, my wife Margaret shivering beside me, and I watched my own son, the boy I raised, the man I sacrificed everything for, slam the door in my face. Christmas Day, 23 degrees. Our breath came out in clouds, and through the window I could see the warm glow of the Christmas tree we'd helped decorate just hours before. That's when I pulled out my phone and made the call that would change everything. Account number 477291. Override code, Silent Night. $3 million gone. Just like that. And my son had no idea what was coming. But before I tell you what happened next, I need you to do something for me. If this story hits you, or if you've ever been betrayed by someone you loved, someone you gave everything to, hit that like button. Subscribe to this channel. And drop a comment telling me what part of the world you're watching from. I need to know I'm not alone in this. I need to know someone out there understands what it means to give your whole life to your child, only to have them throw you away like garbage. My name is Thomas Washington. I'm 72 years old now, but this story takes me back 3 years ago when I was 69, living in Detroit, Michigan, in the house my father built with his own hands in 1967. The house where I raised my son. The house I foolishly signed over to him. This is the story of how I lost everything and got it back in the same night. This is the story of the last Christmas gift I ever gave my son. I need to take you back to understand how we got here. Back to 1982, when David Marcus Washington came into this world screaming at Detroit Receiving Hospital on a Tuesday morning in July. I was 28 years old, working double shifts at the Ford plant on the assembly line, and Margaret was 26, a nurse at the same hospital where she gave birth. We didn't have much money, but we had love. We had dreams. We had this baby boy with my eyes and Margaret's smile. And I remember holding him for the first time thinking, I will give you everything I never had. I will make sure you never struggle like I did. That was my first mistake, though I didn't know it then. I loved that boy so much it blinded me. David grew up in that house on Pingree Street, the one my daddy built after the riots, when he wanted to prove black folks could own something beautiful in this city. 3 bedrooms, hardwood floors, a basement I finished myself, and a backyard where I taught David to throw a football. Every morning I was up at 5, making breakfast before my shift. Eggs, grits, toast, the same meal my mama made for me. Margaret worked nights, so we tag-teamed raising him. When she slept during the day, I came home and did homework with him at the kitchen table. Math problems, spelling words, reading assignments. I didn't finish college myself. Had to drop out when my father died to help support my mother and sisters. But I was determined David would graduate. I was determined he would have every opportunity I missed. The boy was smart, too. Straight A's all through elementary school. Teachers loved him. Mr. Washington, they'd say at parent conferences, David is exceptional. He's going places. And I believed them. I worked overtime, holiday shifts, weekends, whatever it took to save money for his future. Margaret picked up extra shifts at the hospital. We drove the same car for 15 years, a 1977 Buick that broke down more times than I can count. We wore clothes from Goodwill. We never took vacations. But David had new school clothes every September. David had a computer when computers cost a month's salary. David had a college fund that grew bigger every year. We sacrificed everything for that boy. Everything. When David turned 16, I gave him the speech my father gave me. We sat in the backyard on a summer evening, mosquitoes buzzing, the smell of somebody's barbecue drifting over the fence. Son, I said, being a black man in America means you got to work twice as hard to get half as far. But you're smart. You're capable. You do right by people, and good things will come. He nodded, said, yes, sir, the way I taught him. I thought he understood. I thought he was listening. I see now he heard the words, but never felt them in his soul. He never understood what it meant to struggle, because I made sure he never had to. I gave him too much comfort. I made his life too easy. That was my second mistake. High school came and went. David played basketball. Not great, but good enough for the team. He had friends, went to prom, graduated with honors. I was so proud the day he walked across that stage in his cap and gown. I cried like a baby. Margaret squeezed my hand and whispered, we did it, Thomas. We did it. Then came college, University of Michigan. Full scholarship based on his grades and my modest income. Business major. He wanted to be an entrepreneur, he said. Wanted to build something. I supported him completely. Sent him care packages. Drove up to Ann Arbor every month to take him to dinner. And when he graduated in 2004, I was there, in the crowd, cheering louder than anyone. That was the day I thought, all the sacrifice was worth it. My son made it. But I didn't know then that success can make a man forget where he came from. I didn't know that comfort can rot gratitude from the inside out. The years after David's graduation were good ones, or so I thought. He got a job at a marketing firm downtown, started making decent money, moved into a nice apartment in Midtown. Margaret and I were getting older. I was in my 50s now. She was too. And we could feel it in our bones. My back hurt from 30 years on the assembly line. Her knees ached from standing on hospital floors. But we were happy. We had Sunday dinners together, David coming over with a bottle of wine, telling us about his work, his life. He was making something of himself, and that's all we ever wanted. We'd sit around the same kitchen table where I'd helped him with homework, and I'd look at this grown man, my son, and feel like I'd done something right in this world. Then came 2011, and everything started changing. I was 60, Margaret was 58. One morning in March, I woke up with chest pains, sharp, stabbing pains that made me gasp. Margaret drove me to the emergency room, and after hours of tests, the doctor said the words that shake every man my age. Mr. Washington, you had a minor heart attack. Your heart is weak. You need to make some lifestyle changes, reduce stress, and we need to monitor you closely. I spent 3 days in the hospital, hooked up to machines, watching numbers on screens that represented whether I'd live or die. David visited once, stayed for 20 minutes, kept checking his phone. That hurt more than the pain in my chest. But I told myself he was busy. He had a career. I couldn't expect him to drop everything. After I got home, Margaret and I had a serious talk. We sat in the living room, the same room where we'd brought David home from the hospital as a baby. And we talked about mortality, about what would happen to the house if something happened to me. The house was paid off. I'd paid the last mortgage payment 5 years earlier, one of the proudest days of my life. But it was just in my name. And if I died, there'd be probate, complications, maybe even estate taxes. Margaret was worried. "Thomas," she said, her voice shaking, "I don't want to lose this house. It's all we have. It's where we raised David. It's your father's legacy." I held her hand and promised, "You won't lose it. I'll figure something out." That's when I talked to a lawyer, a black woman named Patricia Green, who had an office on Livernois. She laid out options. I could add Margaret to the deed, but there'd still be estate issues when we both passed. Or I could transfer it to David now, with the understanding that we'd live there for the rest of our lives. "It's called a life estate," Patricia explained. "You sign over ownership, but you retain the right to live there until you die. It protects the house from probate and estate taxes. It's a smart move for families." I asked what happened if David ever wanted to sell. She said, "He can't without your permission." "You're protected, Mr. Washington." So I went home and discussed it with Margaret. We both agreed. David was our only child. He'd get the house eventually anyway. Why not do it now and save everyone the headache? In June of 2011, we had David come over for dinner. I made my special ribs, the ones with the dry rub my father taught me. We ate, we laughed, and then I told him our plan. "Son," I said, "your mother and I are getting older. I had that health scare. We want to make things easier for everyone. We're going to sign the house over to you. It'll be yours, but we'll live here until we pass. It's the smart thing to do." David's eyes went wide. "Dad, are you sure? I mean, this is your house. Grandpa's house." I nodded. "And now it'll be yours, your family. This house stays in the family. That's what matters." He hugged me, said thank you, said he'd take care of us forever. I believed him. God help me. I believed every word. 3 weeks later, we signed the papers at Patricia Green's office, and the house that had been in my family for 44 years became David's property. Margaret and I went home that day, feeling like we'd done the right thing. We had no idea we'd just made the biggest mistake of our lives. But signing over the house wasn't the only thing we did that year. See, Margaret and I had been careful with money our whole lives. We saved. We invested a little. I had a pension from Ford. Margaret had her nurse's pension. We had some life insurance policies, and we had about $200,000 in savings. Not a fortune, but more than most folks we knew. One day, Patricia Green called me back to her office. "Mr. Washington," she said, "have you thought about setting up a trust fund for your future grandchildren?" I laughed. "Patricia, David's not even married. No grandkids yet." She smiled. "Exactly, which makes now the perfect time. You can set up an educational trust that grows over time. By the time grandchildren come, it'll be substantial. And there are tax benefits." So, Margaret and I talked about it. We both loved the idea of giving our grandchildren, whoever they might be someday, a head start in life. The kind of head start we gave David, but even better. We decided to put $150,000 into the trust initially, with plans to add more over time. Patricia set it all up with specific conditions. The money was for education, college, trade school, whatever, for our biological grandchildren only. David would be the trustee, managing it, but he couldn't touch the money himself. It was protected, locked away until grandchildren arrived and turned 18. But here's the important part, Patricia told us. Until a grandchild is actually born, you maintain full authority to modify or dissolve this trust. Once a grandchild is born, it's locked. The money becomes theirs. Understand? We both nodded. It seems smart, safe, protective. Over the next 2 years, The trust grew. I kept working until I was 62, then took early retirement. Margaret worked until she was 60, then retired too. We rolled more money into the trust. Eventually it reached $500,000, then kept growing with investments Patricia recommended. By 2014, that trust was worth close to $800,000. By 2018, it crossed $1 million. By 2021, it was sitting at $2.8 million. Every time we added money or checked the statements, Margaret would smile and say, "Our grandbabies are going to have such a good life." I'd nod and think about how different things would have been if I'd had that kind of support when I was young. How I might have finished college. How I might have become an engineer, like I dreamed. I wanted that for my grandchildren. Wanted them to have choices, freedom, opportunity. But while the trust was growing, David was changing. In 2014, he met a woman named Jessica Holloway at a networking event. She was white, which didn't bother us. Love is love. But there was something about her I couldn't quite pin down. Something cold. She was pretty, educated, worked in real estate, came from money in Bloomfield Hills. Her parents owned multiple properties. She talked about investment portfolios and asset management and building generational wealth. At first, I admired her ambition. But then I noticed how she looked at our house, how she asked questions about the property value, the neighborhood, what comparable homes were selling for. "This area is gentrifying," she told David during one Sunday dinner. "Property values are skyrocketing. You could probably get $400,000 for this place." I felt my stomach tighten. Margaret gripped my hand under the table. David and Jessica got engaged in 2015, married in 2016. It was a big wedding at the Detroit Athletic Club. Fancy, expensive, mostly Jessica's family and friends. I wore a suit I bought special for the occasion, and I walked David down the aisle because his mother and I had raised him together as partners. During the reception, Jessica's father, a tall man named Robert Holloway, with silver hair and a firm handshake, cornered me at the bar. "Thomas," he said, "you've done well with that house. Prime real estate. Have you thought about what happens when you and Margaret eventually pass? Estate planning is crucial." I told him we'd already handled it. The house was David's now. Robert raised his eyebrows. "Smart move. Avoiding probate. But you're still living there, correct?" I nodded. "Life estate," I said, showing off that I knew the terms. Robert smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. "Interesting. Well, I'm sure David and Jessica will take good care of you." Something about the way he said it made my blood run cold. That was the first time I felt it. The first whisper of warning that something wasn't right. After the wedding, things changed slowly. So slowly we almost didn't notice at first. David and Jessica moved into a new condo in Royal Oak, a modern place with granite counters and stainless steel everything. They invited us over once, and Jessica gave us a tour like we were strangers, not family. "This is the kitchen, Italian tile, custom cabinets. This is the master suite, California king, imported linens." I kept waiting for her to mention a guest room for us, or to say, "You're welcome, anytime." But she never did. When we left that day, Margaret cried in the car. "She doesn't want us in their life, Thomas," she said. I rubbed her shoulder and said, "Give it time. New marriage, new home. They're adjusting." But I felt it too. The coldness, the distance. Sunday dinners became less frequent. First it was every week, then every other week, then once a month. then only on holidays. David always had excuses. Work was busy. They had plans with Jessica's family. They were traveling. When they did come over, Jessica barely touched the food I cooked. She'd push her plate around, check her phone, make comments like, "This is so traditional," in a tone that made traditional sound like an insult. David would laugh nervously and say, "Babe, my dad's ribs are legendary." But he never stood up for us, never told her to respect his parents. He just became quieter, smaller, like he was shrinking into himself around her. I watched my confident, successful son turn into a man who constantly sought his wife's approval. It broke my heart. In 2018, I turned 66. Margaret turned 64. We were both fully retired now, living on our pensions and Social Security. The house was showing its age. The roof needed repairs. The furnace was acting up. The driveway had cracks. I called David to ask if he could help with some of the repairs, since it was technically his house now. He said he'd think about it. A week later, Jessica called instead. "Thomas," she said, her voice sweet but with steel underneath. "David and I have been discussing the house situation. We appreciate that you're living there, but maintenance costs are concerning. Have you considered downsizing? Maybe a nice senior community? There are some lovely places with medical care on site." I was stunned, silent. "Jessica," I finally said, "this is my home, my father's home. The deed says we have the right to live here for life." She paused. "Of course. We're just thinking about what's best for everyone. We'll talk more later." She hung up before I could respond. I told Margaret about the call that night. She sat on the edge of our bed, the same bed we'd shared for 40 years, and she looked scared. "Thomas, what if they try to force us out?" I shook my head. "They can't. We have legal protection." Patricia Green made sure of it. But the seed of doubt was planted. Over the next few months, Jessica made more comments. She sent Margaret articles about senior living communities. She mentioned how much the house could sell for probably $425,000 now, maybe more. She talked about how David's career was taking off, how they needed to make smart financial decisions. Every conversation felt like pressure, like she was slowly tightening a noose around our necks. And David? David said nothing. He just stood there, nodding along, letting his wife disrespect the people who gave him everything. By 2021, we barely saw them, maybe 4 times a year: Thanksgiving, Christmas, Easter, and David's birthday. Each visit was awkward, tense, full of unspoken resentment. Jessica would walk through our house like she owned it, which technically David did, and she'd point out things that needed updating. "These cabinets are so dated. Have you thought about an open floor plan? Knocking down this wall?" Margaret would excuse herself to the bathroom and cry. I'd clench my fists and remind myself, this is temporary. They'll grow up. They'll remember who we are and what we did for them. But the truth I didn't want to face was this. My son had married a woman who saw us as obstacles, not family. And my son was too weak to stand up to her. That truth haunted me every night as I lay in bed, staring at the ceiling of the room where I'd slept since 1967, wondering how much longer we'd be allowed to call this place home. The call came on December 15th, 2021. David, sounding nervous, said they wanted to host Christmas dinner this year at our house. "Mom and Dad," he said, "Jessica and I want to do something special. We'll bring everything: turkey, sides, dessert. You two just relax. It'll be like old times." I was suspicious. Why the sudden change? But Margaret was thrilled. "Thomas, maybe things are getting better," she said, her eyes bright with hope. "Maybe Jessica's warming up to us." I wanted to believe it. God, I wanted to believe it so badly. So I said yes. We'd host Christmas dinner at the house David technically owned, the house his wife wanted to sell, and we'd pretend we were a normal, loving family. The days leading up to Christmas were strange. David called several times to confirm we'd be there, which seemed odd since we lived there. Jessica texted Margaret asking about the kitchen layout, the size of the oven, whether we had certain serving dishes. Margaret answered every question excitedly, thinking her daughter-in-law was finally making an effort. I wasn't so sure. Something felt off, like when you smell smoke but can't see the fire yet. On December 23rd, I called Patricia Green. I hadn't talked to her in months, but I needed to hear her voice, needed reassurance. "Patricia," I said, "the life estate, it's still solid, right? No one can force us out?" She confirmed. "Thomas, as long as you're alive, that house is yours to live in. They'd have to take you to court and prove you're not maintaining it or you're causing harm to the property. You're protected." I thanked her and hung up, but my hands were shaking. Christmas Eve was quiet. Margaret and I sat in the living room with the tree we decorated together. A small, simple tree with ornaments from David's childhood. There was one from when he was 5, a handprint in clay painted gold. Another from his 10th Christmas, a little basketball he'd been so proud of. Margaret held that basketball ornament and cried. "I miss him, Thomas. I miss our boy. Where did he go?" I pulled her close. "I don't know, baby. I don't know." We watched It's a Wonderful Life on TV like we did every Christmas Eve, but the ending didn't feel hopeful this year. When George Bailey's friends saved him, when the whole town came together, I thought, that's not real. In real life, people forget you. In real life, your own son can look through you like you're invisible. Christmas morning came cold and bright. Snow had started falling around 10 a.m., big fluffy flakes that covered the street in white. Margaret wore her good dress, the burgundy one she saved for special occasions. I wore slacks and a sweater, the kind with a collar that made me look respectable. We set the table with our nice china, the set Margaret's mother had given us as a wedding present. David and Jessica arrived at 2 p.m. in their new Lexus SUV, carrying bags of food. Jessica wore all white, a white sweater, white pants, white boots, and I remember thinking, who wears all white in the snow? But I smiled, hugged David, told them how glad we were they were here. "Merry Christmas, son," I said. He hugged me back, but it felt mechanical, like he was going through the motions. Dinner started fine. The turkey was good, the sides were fine, and we all made small talk about weather, work, nothing important. But I couldn't stop watching Jessica. She barely ate, just pushed food around her plate. Her face looked pale, drawn. She kept excusing herself to the bathroom. And there was something else. Something about the way she carried herself. The way her hand kept moving to her stomach. I'd seen it before, 40 years ago, when Margaret was pregnant with David. That protective hand movement, that unconscious gesture. My heart started pounding. I looked at her more carefully, noticed the slight fullness in her face, the way her clothes fit looser around her middle. And that's when I knew. She was pregnant, maybe 4, 5 months along. Far enough that the trust would lock. far enough that we couldn't take it back, and they hadn't told us. That's why they wanted this dinner, not to reconnect, not to make peace, but to wait until after Christmas. Wait until the baby was further along and safer, and then tell us, after it was too late for us to do anything about the $2.8 million in that trust fund. I put down my fork. The room suddenly felt too small, too hot. Margaret was talking about something, laughing, oblivious. David was eating, avoiding eye contact. And Jessica sat there in her white outfit, her hand on her stomach. And I absolutely knew they had been planning this. Planning to rob us while pretending to love us. Planning to take everything while smiling to our faces. That's when I opened my mouth and asked the question that changed everything. "Jessica," I said quietly, "are you feeling all right? You look a little pale." The room went silent. She stared at me, and I saw it in her eyes. She knew that I knew. David's fork clattered onto his plate, and then Jessica's face twisted into something ugly, something I'd never seen before, and she screamed, "Can you just stop? Can you stop being so intrusive, so controlling, so insufferable? Every single time I see you, you have to comment, you have to pry, you have to make everything about you." The words hit me like fists, and I sat there, frozen, as my son's wife, unleashed. 3 years of hatred at our Christmas dinner table, while snow fell outside, and the ghost of my father watched from the walls he'd built with his own hands. Jessica's voice got louder, shriller, filling every corner of that dining room. "You think you can just ask me personal questions? You think you have the right to comment on my body, my health, my life? You don't. This is exactly why David and I need boundaries." She stood up so fast, her chair scraped against the hardwood floor my father had laid in 1968. Her hands were shaking, her face red now instead of pale, and I could see Margaret shrinking in her seat, tears forming in her eyes. I wanted to say something, wanted to defend us, but my throat felt tight. I just sat there, this 70-year-old man, in his own dining room. No, not his own anymore, his son's dining room, being screamed at for caring, for noticing, for being a father and grandfather-to-be who gave a damn. David finally spoke, but not to defend us. "Dad," he said, his voice cold and measured, "you need to apologize to Jessica. You crossed a line." I turned to look at my son, this man I'd raised, this boy I'd sacrificed everything for, and I didn't recognize him. His eyes were hard, distant. He wasn't looking at me like I was his father. He was looking at me like I was a problem to be solved. "Apologize?" I said, my voice barely a whisper. "Son, I just asked if she was feeling okay, that's all. I was worried. That's what family does. We check on each other." But David shook his head. "No, Dad. What family does is respect boundaries. What family does is give each other space. You and Mom have been suffocating us for years." The words hit like a punch to the gut. Suffocating. Years of working overtime. Years of going without. Years of putting his needs before ours. And we'd been suffocating him. Margaret started crying openly now, not even trying to hide it. "David, baby, please," she said through her tears. "We love you. We just love you." But Jessica cut her off. "Love isn't control, Margaret. Love isn't making us feel guilty every time we live our own lives. Love isn't—" She stopped mid-sentence, her hand going to her stomach again, and in that moment I saw it clearly, the slight swell beneath her loose white sweater, the way she protected it instinctively. She was definitely pregnant, probably 20 weeks or more. and they'd been hiding it from us deliberately. They'd been waiting until the baby was born, so that $2.8 million trust became permanent, untouchable. My blood went cold. "You're pregnant," I said. Not a question, a statement. The room froze. Jessica's face went white again. David's mouth opened, but no sound came out. Margaret gasped, her hand flying to her chest. "You're pregnant," I repeated, standing up now, my chair scraping just like Jessica's had. "That's what this is about. That's why you're so angry," I noticed. "You've been hiding it from us. How far along? 4 months? 5? Far enough. That you thought we wouldn't figure it out before it was too late?" Jessica's eyes narrowed. "Too late for what, Thomas?" Her voice was poisoned now, dripping with contempt. "What exactly do you think you can do?" And that's when I knew for certain. They'd planned this. They knew about the trust conditions. They knew we could dissolve it before a grandchild was born. They'd been running out the clock, using us, manipulating us, all while pretending to care. David stood up too, and for a moment I hoped he'd tell the truth, admit what they'd done, maybe even apologize. But instead he said the words that shattered what was left of my heart. "I think you two need to leave." Margaret made a sound like she'd been stabbed. "David, no," she whispered. "Baby, please. This is our home." But David shook his head. "It's my home, Mom. Legally, it's my house. You've just been living here. And right now, I'm asking you to leave. Jessica's pregnant. Yes, she's pregnant. And yes, we didn't tell you because we knew you'd make it about yourselves. We need space. We need peace. And we can't have that with you here." Snow was falling heavier outside now. I could see it through the window, thick and fast. The temperature had dropped to the low 20s, and my son was telling us to leave. On Christmas Day, in a blizzard. I looked at Margaret, saw the devastation in her eyes, and something inside me broke. Not broke sad, broke open. Broke into clarity. This wasn't my son anymore. This was a stranger wearing my son's face, controlled by a woman who saw us as nothing but obstacles to money. And I was done hoping, done sacrificing, done being treated like trash in the house my father built with his hands that bled from hard work. I took Margaret's hand and helped her stand. She was shaking, crying, but I squeezed her fingers and whispered, "It's okay, baby. We're okay." I walked to the front closet, pulled out our coats, old coats, worn coats, but warm enough. I helped Margaret into hers, buttoned it myself because her hands were trembling too much. David and Jessica stood in the hallway watching us like we were performers in a show they'd paid to see. No guilt on their faces, no second thoughts. Just cold determination to get us out. I put on my own coat, a navy blue winter jacket I'd owned for 15 years, and I patted my pockets to make sure I had my phone, my wallet, everything I needed. Then I looked at my son one last time. "I'm sorry," I said quietly. "I'm sorry I loved you too much. I'm sorry I gave you everything. That was my mistake." We stepped out into the snow, and the door slammed behind us. The sound echoed in the Christmas afternoon. The sound of rejection, of abandonment, of family bonds breaking like ice under pressure. Snow was coming down so thick I could barely see across the street. It covered Margaret's hair within seconds, turning her gray curls white. Her thin coat wasn't enough for this weather. I knew that, she knew that, but neither of us said anything. We just stood there on the porch of the house that used to be ours, and we breathed. In and out, in and out. I could see our breath mixing with the falling snow, and I thought, this is what it looks like when dreams die. They freeze in midair and fall to the ground where people step on them without even noticing. Margaret looked at me, her eyes red from crying, her lips trembling from cold and heartbreak. "Thomas," she said, "where are we going to go?" And that's when I pulled out my phone. My hands weren't shaking anymore. They were steady, calm, clear. I scrolled through my contacts, found the number I needed, pressed call. It rang twice before a professional voice answered. "Green and Associates, this is the answering service. How may I direct your call?" I said, "This is Thomas Washington. I need to speak with Patricia Green immediately. Client emergency." There was a pause. "Mr. Washington, it's Christmas Day. Ms. Green is—" I interrupted. "Tell her it's about the trust. Tell her I'm standing in the snow. Tell her my son just kicked me out of my house. Tell her I need to execute the dissolution. Now." Another pause, longer this time. Then, "Please hold." Elevator music played in my ear while snow fell on my head, and Margaret watched me with growing understanding in her eyes. She knew what I was about to do. She knew what this phone call meant, and she nodded. Just once, but firm. "Yes, do it." After what felt like an hour, but was probably 2 minutes, Patricia's voice came on the line, breathless, like she'd been running. Thomas, what's happening?" I told her, fast and clear. "Kicked out. Christmas Day. Jessica pregnant. Hiding it. The manipulation. The betrayal. Everything." Patricia was quiet for a moment, then said, "Thomas, if you dissolve the trust now, that money reverts to your personal account. All $2.8 million. But you need to be certain. Once it's done, it's done. That money will never go to any grandchildren." I looked at the house. Through the window, I could see David and Jessica standing close together, probably celebrating that they'd finally gotten rid of us. I thought about my father, Marcus Washington, who built that house with his own hands to prove black families could own something beautiful. I thought about all the years I worked myself to exhaustion to give David opportunities. I thought about Margaret's tears, her trembling hands, the way she looked when our son told us to leave, and I made my decision. "Patricia, I'm certain. Execute the trust. Dissolution. Account number 477291. Override code is Silent Night." I could hear typing on her end, fast clicking of computer keys. "Thomas, I need verbal confirmation one more time. You understand this is permanent?" I looked at Margaret. She nodded again. "Yes," I said. "I confirm. Dissolve the trust. Immediately." More typing, more clicking. Then Patricia's voice, softer now. "It's done, Thomas. The trust is dissolved. The funds are being transferred back to your primary account. It'll show up within the hour." "I'm so sorry this happened. I am so sorry." I thanked her and hung up. My phone felt heavy in my hand, like it was made of lead instead of plastic and glass. Margaret reached for it, looked at the screen, then looked at me. Snow was covering both of us now, turning us into ghosts. "Did we just—" she started. "Yes," I said. "It's done. David gets nothing. His children get nothing. That money is ours again." And right then, right at that exact moment, my phone buzzed with a text message from Patricia. "Dissolution complete. Trust funds returned to your account. Current balance, $2847,392.16. Merry Christmas." I showed the message to Margaret. She read it, and for the first time since Jessica started screaming, she smiled. Not a big smile. Not a happy smile. but a smile that said justice. We did it. We took back what was ours. We started walking down the driveway, our feet crunching in fresh snow that was already 3 inches deep and getting deeper. I didn't look back at the house. Didn't need to. That chapter of my life was over. Margaret held my arm tight, leaning on me like she used to when we were young, before age and disappointment weighed us down. "Thomas," she said, her voice muffled by snow and wind, "where are we really going?" I squeezed her hand. "Sarah's house, David's cousin, remember? She invited us months ago. Said her guest house was always open if we needed it. I called her last week just in case. She lives 3 blocks over on Dexter. We can walk it." Margaret nodded, and we kept moving. 2 old people trudging through a Christmas blizzard, leaving behind everything we'd built. We'd only made it halfway down the block when I heard it, a shout from behind us. I turned and saw David burst out onto the porch, his phone in his hand, his face transformed. The coldness was gone. Now there was panic, raw and desperate. He was staring at his phone screen, and even from this distance, I could see his hands shaking. He'd gotten a notification, probably from his bank or from the trust account. Probably an alert that said, "Trust dissolution complete. Account balance 000." He looked up, his eyes scanning the street wildly, until they found us. "Dad!" he screamed. "Dad, wait, please!" But I didn't wait. I turned back around and kept walking. Margaret looked at me, questioning. "Thomas?" I shook my head. "Keep walking, baby. Don't look back." David was running now, running through the snow in just his dress shirt and slacks. No coat. His dress shoes slipping on the icy sidewalk. "Dad, please! I'm sorry. I'm so sorry. Please, we can talk about this." His voice was cracking, breaking, the voice of a little boy who just realized he broke something precious and can't fix it. Jessica appeared on the porch, too, wrapping a coat around herself, her face stricken. She was yelling something, but I couldn't hear her over the wind. David caught up to us, stumbling, nearly falling, grabbing my arm. "Dad, the trust!" "What did you do?" "Where's the money? The account is empty." I stopped walking and turned to face my son. Snow had gathered on his hair, his shoulders. He looked young suddenly, vulnerable, like the boy who used to have nightmares and crawl into our bed for comfort. But that boy was gone. This was just a man who'd made bad choices and was facing consequences. "You kicked us out," I said simply, "on Christmas Day, in a blizzard. You chose your wife over your parents. You chose money over family. So I made a choice, too." David's eyes went wide with understanding. No, you couldn't have. The trust was protected. It was locked." I cut him off. "It was only locked after a grandchild was born, David. Patricia Green made that very clear when we set it up. As long as no grandchild existed yet, we maintained full authority to modify or dissolve the trust. You should have told us about the pregnancy sooner. You should have been honest. But you waited, thinking you were being clever, thinking you could manipulate us." David's face crumbled. "Dad, that's almost $3 million. That was for our child. For your grandchild." I felt something twist in my chest, but I pushed it down. "No," I said firmly. "That money was from us, earned by us, saved by us, and given in trust for a family that respected us. But you don't respect us. You threw us out like garbage. So the money came back to us, where it belongs." David fell to his knees in the snow. Actually fell to his knees, like he'd been shot. "Please, Dad, please. I made a mistake. We made a mistake. Jessica was just upset. She's hormonal. She didn't mean... But I was done listening to excuses. Stand up, David, I said quietly. Stand up and go back inside to your wife and your warm house. The house I gave you. The house you used to throw us out. Go back inside and figure out how you're going to pay for your child's future. Because it won't be with our money. It'll be with your own hard work, your own sacrifice, just like we did, just like my father did. Maybe that'll teach you something. I turned away from my kneeling son and took Margaret's hand again. We walked toward Sarah's house, and behind us I could hear David sobbing in the snow, his cries mixing with the wind, becoming just another sound of winter. Sarah Washington Collins lived in a beautiful brick house on Dexter Avenue, a place she'd bought with her professor's salary after teaching at Wayne State for 30 years. She was David's cousin, my brother Robert's daughter, and she'd always been close to us, calling every week, visiting on birthdays. When Margaret and I arrived at her door, soaked with snow and shivering, she took one look at us and pulled us inside without a single question. Uncle Thomas, Aunt Margaret, she said, wrapping us in her arms. I've been expecting you. Come in, come in. The guest house is ready. She led us through her warm home to a small cottage in the backyard, a 2-bedroom place with a fireplace already burning, towels laid out, and a pot of soup warming on the stove. I knew something was wrong when you called last week, Sarah said, helping Margaret out of her wet coat. I knew David was up to something. We spent the next hour telling Sarah everything while we warmed up and dried off. She listened without interrupting, her face growing darker with each detail. When I got to the part about dissolving the trust, she actually cheered. Good, she said fiercely. Good. He deserved it. They both did. Then she made us eat, forced hot soup and bread into us, until color returned to our faces. Margaret fell asleep almost immediately afterward, exhausted from emotion and cold, curled up under thick blankets in the guest bedroom. I sat with Sarah by the fireplace, staring at the flames, still processing everything that had happened. Uncle Thomas, Sarah said gently, you did the right thing. I know it hurts. I know he's your son, but he needed to learn. I nodded, but my chest felt hollow. Doing the right thing didn't always feel good. Around 8 p.m., there was pounding on Sarah's front door. Loud, desperate, angry pounding. Sarah and I looked at each other. We both knew who it was. Stay here, Sarah said, standing up. I'll handle this. But I followed her anyway. I needed to face this. Sarah opened the front door, and there stood David and Jessica. David looked like hell, eyes red, hair wild, clothes still damp from the snow. Jessica stood behind him, her face hard and calculating even now. Where are they? David demanded. Where are my parents? I know they're here. Sarah crossed her arms. They're resting, and you're not welcome. David tried to push past her, but Sarah planted herself firm in the doorway. Back up, cousin. You don't get to bully your way in here. That's when I stepped forward. I'm here, David. He saw me, and something like relief crossed his face. Dad, thank God. Please, we need to talk. We need to fix this. But Jessica spoke up, her voice sharp. Fix this. Thomas, you stole from us. That money was supposed to be for our child. You had no right. I laughed. Actually laughed, a bitter sound that surprised even me. I had no right. Jessica, that was my money, mine and Margaret's. We earned it. We saved it. We put it in trust. As a gift for grandchildren, we hoped. would be raised by a son who loved us. But you showed me today that's not what you want. You want money without family. You want inheritance without relationship. Well, you can't have both. David stepped forward, desperation in his eyes. Dad, please. We'll apologize. We'll make it right. Jessica will apologize to Mom. I'll apologize to you both. We'll have family dinners again. I held up my hand. Stop, just stop, David. You don't get it. This isn't about apologies. This is about who you've become. You threw your parents out in a blizzard on Christmas Day because your wife screamed at us for caring about her health. You stood there and let her call us suffocating, controlling, insufferable. You told us we were just living in your house. Like we were guests, you could evict at will. And you know what the worst part is? You weren't even man enough to tell us about your wife's pregnancy. You hid it, plotted around it, waited until you thought it was safe. You tried to manipulate us, your own parents, to secure your financial future. That's not the son I raised. That's not the man I wanted you to be. So no, David, I'm not giving you that money. Not now. Not ever. You want to provide for your child? Do it the way I did. Work for it. Sacrifice for it. Earn it. David and Jessica left that night. Jessica screaming threats about lawyers and lawsuits. David silent and broken. Sarah called the police to make sure they wouldn't come back. Filed a complaint for harassment, just to have it on record. Then she locked her doors, checked on Margaret, who was still sleeping, and sat with me by that fireplace until almost midnight. Uncle Thomas, she said quietly, how are you really doing? I thought about her question. How was I doing? I'd just lost my only son. I'd given away the house my father built. I'd dissolved a trust meant for grandchildren I'd never know. By any measure, I should have been destroyed. But sitting there in Sarah's guest house, warm and safe with people who actually loved me, I felt something unexpected. Peace. I'm okay, I told Sarah. And I meant it. I'm sad. I'm disappointed. I'll probably always wonder if I could have done something different to change how David turned out. But I'm okay. Sarah nodded. You know what my daddy, your brother Robert, used to say? He said, you can give your children roots and wings, but you can't control where they fly. You gave David everything, Uncle Thomas. Education, values, opportunities. But he chose to fly toward someone who doesn't value what you tried to teach him. That's on him, not you. I let those words sink in, felt their truth. She was right. I'd done my part. The rest was David's responsibility, his choices, his consequences. Over the next few weeks, David tried to reach us. Phone calls, text messages, emails, even letters delivered to Sarah's house. Each one said basically the same thing. He was sorry. Jessica was sorry. They wanted to make amends. Could we please reconsider the trust? I read the first few messages, then stopped. Margaret read them all, cried over them, but ultimately agreed with me that words were cheap. If he'd really changed, she said one morning over breakfast, he'd accept our decision and try to rebuild the relationship without the money. But every message mentions the trust. Every single one. She was right. David wasn't sorry he'd hurt us. He was sorry he'd lost $3 million. In February of 2022, Patricia Green called with news. Thomas, you should know, David and Jessica filed a lawsuit trying to reinstate the trust. They're claiming you dissolved it under duress, that you were emotionally compromised, that you didn't understand what you were doing. I asked what our chances were. Patricia laughed. Zero chance they'll win. You called me from a cell phone with GPS coordinates showing you were outside your home. I have recordings of our conversation where you sounded perfectly rational. You confirmed multiple times you understood the consequences. And the trust documents explicitly gave you authority to dissolve it before a grandchild's birth. It's an open and shut case. Don't worry. The lawsuit was dismissed 3 months later, and David and Jessica appealed. That was dismissed too. They lost, and they had to pay court costs. I didn't feel victorious. I just felt tired. The baby was born in June 2022, a girl named Emma. Sarah saw the announcement on Facebook and showed it to us. There was a photo. David holding his daughter, Jessica smiling in a hospital bed. Margaret cried when she saw it. That's our grandbaby Thomas. Our grandbaby, and we'll never know her. I held my wife while she grieved, and I grieved too. But I didn't regret my decision. Emma would grow up with parents who needed to learn the value of hard work, the importance of respect, the meaning of family beyond money. Maybe that would make her a better person than David turned out to be. Maybe pain and struggle would teach David and Jessica what comfort and ease never could. I had to believe that, had to hope that some good would come from this brokenness. It's been 3 years now since that Christmas Day. I'm 72. Margaret is 70. We still live in Sarah's guest house, though we pay her rent despite her protests. We volunteer at the community center, teach financial literacy to young families, try to help others avoid the mistakes we made. The $2.8 million sits in our account, growing with interest. We've written a will leaving most of it to Sarah, some to various charities, some to a scholarship fund for Detroit kids who want to go to college. Not a penny to David. Patricia says he could contest the will when we die, but probably won't win. That gives me comfort. Sometimes I drive past the old house on Pingree Street, the one my father built. David still lives there with Jessica and Emma. I've seen them in the yard sometimes. David pushing Emma on a swing set he installed where my garden used to be. He looks older now, worn down. I heard through family gossip that he had to take a second job to pay for the baby's expenses, that Jessica's real estate business isn't doing well, that they're struggling financially. Part of me feels vindicated. Part of me just feels sad. That's my son. That's my granddaughter. And we're strangers now, separated by decisions and consequences that can't be undone. But here's what I learned, what I want you to understand if you've watched this whole story. Sometimes love means letting go. Sometimes the greatest gift you can give your children isn't money or comfort or security. It's the chance to face consequences, to learn from their mistakes, to become who they're supposed to be through struggle instead of ease. I gave David everything, and it ruined him. It made him entitled, ungrateful, weak. So when he threw me away, I took back what I'd given and forced him to build his own life. That was the last Christmas gift I ever gave my son. Not money, not comfort, but accountability. And maybe someday, when Emma is grown and David is old like me, he'll understand why I did it. Maybe he'll thank me. Maybe he won't. But either way, I can face my father's ghost in that house on Pingree Street and say, I tried my best. I loved as hard as I could. And when love wasn't enough, I had the strength to walk away. If you made it this far, if this story touched you at all, drop a comment below. Tell me where you're watching from. Tell me if you've ever had to make an impossible choice between love and self-respect. Tell me I'm not alone in this. Because some nights, when the snow falls, like it did on that Christmas day, I still wonder if I did the right thing. And I need to know that somewhere out there, someone understands. Someone gets it. Someone knows that sometimes the hardest part of being a parent isn't giving your children everything. It's knowing when to give them nothing at all. God bless you all. And remember, peace don't come cheap, but it's worth every penny you'll never spend.